What's up, fam? Welcome back to another chilling chapter. Before we dive into today's twisted mystery, Nero Wolfe and the knife that never cut bread, hit me up. What made you smile today? And where in the world are you listening from? I'm featuring your stories in the next drop, so don't be shy. Now grab your tea, dim the lights, and get ready. Because nothing in Nero Wolfe and the knife that never cut bread is ever what it seems. Chapter 1. The enigmatic guest emerges. The aroma of simmering lamb stock wafted from the kitchen like a siren's call. But the mastermind responsible for it remained blissfully ensconced beneath a fortress of books, his brow furrowed in concentration. Nero Wolfe, in all his resplendent bulk, was contemplating the finer points of subliminal message theory when I entered the library. It was that moment when a fine balance hung between culinary delights and the impending thrill of a new puzzle. I paused, letting the fragrant allure do its work. "Wolfe," I began, "I assume the garden is not weeding itself, nor are the orchids practicing their bloom." His heavy eyes flickered to the tray beside him, but returned to his pages. "Weeding is a task for labourers. You must learn to prioritize, Archie. The garden thrives without my heavy hand, while knowledge flourishes only in intimate engagement. Engagement fades when it's left too long on the shelf. Even books grow stale." I stored away his reminder for future reference. After all, that lamentable instance of the missing Bartholomew manuscript was still fresh in my mind. Just then, the doorbell chimed, a slight constricted sound that sent Wolfe's eyebrows up like a couple of startled coots. "Who visits at this hour?" he demanded. "I'll check," I replied, making my way to the door. I had scarcely anticipated the rather ethereal figure of a woman in her early 30s, draped in a crimson velvet cloak that whispered of both danger and allure. Her raven hair cascaded in waves, framing a face that held the kind of beauty destined for a silver screen. "Mr. Wolfe." Her voice was melodious, tinged with an uncertainty that did not suit her striking appearance. "I was told I might find him here." "Indeed," I said, stepping aside. "Step in. I am Archie Goodwin. Wolfe will be with you shortly." Entered, leaving a hint of jasmine in her wake. "I'm Mimosa Devereux," she declared, her tone brightening as she spoke. "Hey, I have a predicament that requires his particular expertise." "Your predicament?" I prompted, supplying a warm smile to ease her anxiety. "It involves a disappearance," she said, lowering her voice as though the very walls might report her words. As she spoke, I noted her eyes darting, absorbing the quaintness of the brownstone with both appreciation and suspicion. I motioned for her to take a seat while I moved to summon my employer. With a deft twist of the handle, the oak door swung open, and I found Wolfe still perched in his chair, a portrait of indifference. "Mimosa Devereux, Mr. Wolfe," I introduced. "She has come seeking your assistance regarding a disappearance." Devereux stood, her grace undisturbed, as Wolfe slowly extracted himself from his chair's embrace. "Miss Devereux, you make a most striking entrance," he said, his voice a deep rumble, tempered with a hint of irritable curiosity. "Thank you," she replied, her chin lifting. With haste came additives of sheer desperation, you see. "It is my brother Louis. He has vanished." Wolfe narrowed his eyes, a flash of interest igniting behind the mask of ennui. "When last were you in his company?" 2 days ago." She hesitated, a hint of distress bleeding through her restrained exterior. "He was to meet someone important. yet came home late. I dismissed it, for he often does so when duty calls, but he never returned. Does duty call when one is overdue? I interjected smoothly, or does it simply whisper tantalizing promises? Touché, Mr. Goodwin, she said, surprisingly at ease. But this is different. Lewis is ambitious, and ambition often masks negligence. He is a banker, heavily involved with several transactions. He must have crossed the wrong party. Wolfe's brow creased as he clasped his hands behind his back, pacing back and forth, the wooden floor creaking underfoot. And how may I assist you? I need you to find him, she implored, her tone suddenly more urgent, and ensure his safety while you're at it. Finding him is within the realm of possibility, Wolfe murmured as he resumed his pacing. But ensuring his safety, that depends wholly on the machinations governing his absence and availability of resources at our disposal. Who might those resources be? Any number of unlawful characters, should your brother be embroiled in any financial indiscretions. However, if his attendance is purely with well-intentioned dealings, I will call to inquire on his whereabouts. I believe it's the latter, she responded, her voice wavering. I could see Wolfe's cogs turning, his mind engaged, despite the apparent irritability of the situation. Archie, you seem abnormally keen at the moment. I require you to collect information relevant to this case, he said, transforming irritation into a sort of gruffness I had come to interpret as appreciation. Right you are, I said, suppressing the urge to tease him about the 5 pounds of lamb simmering in the kitchen. What do we know? As we turned to focus on the details of Mimosa's life, pressing questions rattled in my mind. Is there anywhere or anyone your brother would have gone to? She drew in a breath. There is Francesca, a woman, she began, then caught the weight of Wolfe's stare. An interesting fibre to this tapestry. Go on. My brother has been involved with Francesca for months. I only met her last week at a soirée, the kind they throw atop those scandalous skyscraper residences. He seemed quite entranced with her, she confessed, her head shaking slightly. So you think she may have something to do with his disappearance? Perhaps. Her voice wavered again. Or perhaps not. I cannot say. Very well. Wolfe's eyes gleamed with amusement, the way one might observe a chalice filled to the brim with promise. Archie will visit this Francesca. We will find out if your brother has been viewed recently, and by whom. I'll conduct the research and await your return. The conversation continued, logic and intent throbbing through the air like an electric current. Soon Mimosa departed, her cloak trailing behind like a phantom in the night. As time flitted lazily by that afternoon, I slipped into my coat and made my way to the plush world of the skyscraper residences. The name struck me. Francesca was an echoed whisper, a flickering candle amidst a chill wind. Yet beneath the glamour was a darkness ripe for unearthing. 3 hours later, I returned to the brownstone, unearthing bitter truths and curious lies. The tension cracked in the suspension between each tick of the clock, but Wolfe remained calm as he leaned back into the cushions of his gathered thoughts. Miss Devereux's brother is fine, I presume? Wolfe asked, arching his brow. Fine is relative. He's lounging at Francesca's apartment. At least he wasn't a corpse. But that woman is clever, Wolfe. She could weave webs that ensnare the most discerning eye. Wolfe's lips curled. upward dangerously. Then we have an enchanting story yet to unfold. I settled down, ready to engage with a tension that throbbed beneath the surface and projected beyond the flimsy shadows cast by our activities. "Are you going to pursue the matter, Wolfe?" I prompted. His response bore an irascible tone. "I am not moved by the pantomime of intrigue. How well do you know your herbs, Archie?" "Could be better. Why, your brother's absence will become a matter of excess scrutiny. A fining of sorts, shall we? Now bring me pen and paper." And just like that, we entered the labyrinth. Deceptions were hastily laid, and as I prepared to relay my gathered intel, I couldn't help but smile. We were well on our way to unveiling another layer, one steeped in both charm and ill intent. The mysteries of New York, I thought, never sleep, nor do they fade. Like the scent of our long-awaited roast, they simmered quietly, patiently waiting. And I, as always, was exhilarated to follow where those culinary threads would lead us next. Chapter 2. Shadows on the Waterfront. Beneath the neon haze of Manhattan's evening glow, the waterfront exuded a languid charm that belied the undercurrents of intrigue swirling like fog on the East River. A brisk wind carried the salty tang of the sea and the distant cry of gulls, but I marched onward with a purpose born of Wolfe's latest endeavour. This time I was set to confront Francesca, the enchantress whose siren songs had lured Louis Devereux into a web of deceit. I arrived at a modest yet elegantly situated apartment building that loomed over the docks, a place where secrets whispered through the walls. The doorman, a mere wisp of a man, thumbed through a tattered newspaper, but when I produced my hat and horned my eyes into a semblance of authority, he straightened. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you?" "Indeed you can. I'd like to see Miss Francesca." He squinted, appearing to weigh the matter against the contents of the newspaper. "She's not receiving visitors, if I may say so." I sidestepped his polite disdain. "She is receiving me. I'm a friend of Louis Devereux." The mention of Louis stirred something in the doorman's half-closed demeanour. "Ah," shifted a mere fraction in his posture. "You can take the elevator to the 4th floor." "Thank you, my good man. You've saved me the indignity of mounting the stairs." With a warm nod, I left him pondering my abrupt ascendancy as I stepped into the elevator. The ride was smooth. I tapped my fingers lightly against the oak panelling, a stark contrast to the urgency threading through my mind. Francesca awaited, a captivating fitness to the drama, whether a victim or a puppet master. Upon reaching the 4th floor, I stepped into the corridor, perfumed with a blend of muted jasmine and cigarette smoke. I approached the door, noting the subtle hand-painted details that hinted at a flair for aesthetics, with a small brass plaque proclaiming the occupant's name in ornate lettering. My knock resonated against the lacquered wood, until finally the door opened a fraction. Francesca's eyes appeared first, glimmering like dark marbles, assessing my worthiness. "Mr. Goodwin, I presume. Dramatic flair at the entrance, Francesca. You can let me in. I'm not here to make mischief yet." The corner of my mouth twitched upward. She hesitated, but curiosity pulled her further into view, effectively granting me entry. The space within, dressed in bold colours and delicate furnishings, mirrored the woman herself. bewitching yet oddly disquieting. Please, sit. Would you like some Madeira? Only if your intentions are equally fine. I find that the beverage reveals much about one's character. Francesca laughed softly, retreating into a high-backed chair, her demeanour shifting as she poured the amber liquid. Charming. And you think me wicked? I find that most people live somewhere between malice and virtue. It's the balance that interests me. Her eyes narrowed, a small smile playing on her lips. Then, what brings you here, Mr. Goodwin? To discuss Lewis, I assume. I settled into my own chair, feeling the tension crawl about like a restless cat. Indeed, he's been spirited away, though I suspect he's merely high on charm and low on forethought. Do you care to enlighten me about his recent visit? Lewis? My, how intriguing, she replied, feigning surprise, yet an undercurrent of tension simmered below her expertly crafted facade. He's a handsome man, full of himself, but I'm afraid I cannot speak for his whereabouts. Yet you were present when he vanished, I pressed, leaning forward, tenacity threading my every word. 2 days ago, if I recall correctly. So the question must be asked, did he talk of coming to see you that night? Francesca leaned back, her voice edged with amusement. Men often seek the company of beautiful women at their convenience. Louis is not unique in that regard. The glint in her eyes betrayed a hint of mischief. I didn't claim he was unique. However, I do imagine you are well aware of his predilections. The soirees, the whispered conversations, the clandestine meetings. I waved a hand, punctuating my point. When does playing coy transform into deception? Hiding behind the mask of innocence, Mr. Goodwin, is an art, she replied, her demeanour deceptively light. But my only interest in Louis has been for entertainment, nothing more. Oh? I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Is it entertainment alone, or have his ambitions intertwined with something more sinister? Francesca's gaze hardened, momentarily, then softened. Listen, I am no criminal. Louis is his own man. Perhaps he was simply distracted. He can be self-absorbed, you see. The master of deductions in Wolfe's brow danced in my memory. And yet you light the stage with excuses. What say you to meeting matters at hand? If his disappearance holds dangers related to his business dealings. Francesca held up a hand, cutting my inquiry short as her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine alarm threading through the carefully curated artifice. Business? Louis isn't? Just then, the distinct sound of a throat clearing interrupted our tête-à-tête. I turned to spot a rotund gentleman with a clammy visage lurking in the shadow of the doorway. The air immediately thickened with tension, a dark cloud materializing swiftly, born of suspicion. Ah, Francesca, he croaked, stepping in despite my presence. I didn't expect to find you with company this evening. And I did not expect you, Mr. Hargrove, Francesca replied, her composure slipping just a fraction. Well, sweethearts don't tend to work in hours, he noted, sneering as though he owned the room. You're up to no good, Francesca. Entertaining men who carry your secrets into the light. The air crackled with an insistent charge. I stood. The atmosphere waited in uncertainty, ready to shed light on the encroaching darkness. Perhaps you can illuminate us, Hargrove? What secrets may be at play? His brow knitted in surprise, but he quickly regained his self-possession. "You'll want to head home, Goodwin. I don't think you are welcome here." "Is that a request? Or a veiled threat?" I replied, advancing one step further, feeling the drama come alive. Francesca's facade shattered momentarily, revealing a hint of fear. "Gentlemen, let's not. Too late," Hargrove interjected, his demeanour shifting to an aggressive stance. I pivoted, summoning every ounce of determination. "I'll have the last word, gentlemen. Louis Devereux's ambitions have snagged him in a web, and perhaps you hold part of the thread. He may be innocent, but the danger he faces will not be muted by your silence." As I spoke, I caught a glimmer in Francesca's eyes, an awakening of concern as the realization settled. Just then, the door swung open again, and the familiar silhouette of Nero Wolfe filled the frame, his frilled shirt and unyielding countenance exuding an authority that dissipated tension like a sigh of relief. "Goodwin," he pronounced, disdain woven intricately into his tone. "Have you managed to set the stage for our next act of folly?" "Perfect timing, Wolfe," I called back, triumph igniting within me. "Turns out both our vendors are present, and they hold more than a copy of Lewis's whereabouts." Wolfe stepped further in, casting a disdainful glance at Hargrove and a keen eye upon Francesca. "I would suggest our scene be distinctly more illuminating before we peel back additional layers." The weight of their suddenly unveiled motivations thickened the room like smoke. I could already see the several paths stretching out before us, the villainy exposed, yet the true culprit remained tangled in the shadows. "Lewis, alas, is merely a pawn," Wolfe murmured, his innate brilliance already processing the unfolding. "Drama and pawns serve at the pleasure of sharper knives." The time for chess had begun, and I relished each moment as we entered the intricate dance of wits and strategies that lingered upon the wind beneath dim streetlights. The night was young, and the city was alive with stories yearning to be told. Chapter 3. A Dame with a Deadly Agenda. The sun dipped behind a curtain of late afternoon clouds, casting an amber hue over the New York skyline. The scents of the city blended: freshly baked bread from the nearby deli, the pungent aroma of exhaust, fumes and the floral notes from the window boxes below Wolfe's study. Inside the brownstone, however, these odours were eclipsed by the drifting scent of good old-fashioned pasta al pomodoro that Fritz had artfully prepared in the kitchen. It was a delicate balance of flavours, enough to endow anyone with a sense of ease, if only for an hour. I entered the sanctum, my shoes muffled against the rich Persian carpets, and found Wolfe perusing a stack of papers with a furrowed brow, his round spectacles resting low on his nose. "Ah, Archie," he said, lifting his gaze but not moving an inch from his oversized chair. "Tell me of our divine culinary repast. If you will, must you supplant every detail of my afternoon tranquillity with your latest escapade? Tranquillity has a way of flooding the room, Wolfe, but I do believe our evening meal deserves your attention. A hint of garlic, ripe tomatoes, a worthy Parmigiano, and the promise of basil await your discerning palate." I leaned against the door casing, letting the words stew like the sauce itself. "However, I come bearing news that might just tickle your fancies more than a simple plate could." "Pray, enlighten me," he said, dismissively waving a plump hand in my direction, with Wolfe, knowing the right bait to lure him, had always been half the battle. Remember Francesca, that striking enchantress from the waterfront? It seems she's entangled herself with Hargrove and his dubious dealings. They are all duplicitous enough, Wolfe quipped. Let us also remember charm is but packed flour dusted onto gristle. I presume there is more to your tale. Indeed, Hargrove acted like a man who knows a little too much, which means an ounce of suspicion could yield a pound of trouble. Wolfe's brow lifted slightly. Intriguing. And you believe this trouble merits investigation? Only if I can get paid for my trouble, as always. I settled into the chair opposite Wolfe, further enmeshing myself in my narrative. I wager both those characters are playing a game, and I'm not sure who's shuffling the cards. Francesca has an agenda, one that may lead to a prize worth pursuing. Then you may desire to pay her a visit. By the way, her dinner invitations fall short of my taste. But should you chance to lay eyes upon her again, may I suggest a careful appraisal of her fingernails? Oily men can leave their fingerprints. Not only the oily ones, Wolfe. No, men disperse evidence if you know how to look. I rose to retrieve my hat, feeling the weight of the mission settle comfortably on my shoulders like a well-worn coat. I'll visit Francesca and shoo away those oily fellows. Hargrove won't be a problem long. As I traversed Manhattan that evening, the sun painted the sky in ochre and crimson hues. My footsteps echoed against the cobbled sidewalks in rhythmic defiance of the encroaching night. I approached Francesca's building, a modest brownstone near the docks that belied the contents of its past. Its charm contrasted sharply with the characters who roamed its shadowed halls. The doorman lifted his brow slightly as I greeted him with a knowing smile. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, obviously perturbed but unable to entirely mask his curiosity. "Miss Francesca is expecting you." "Only if you let the lady know I bear no ill intentions," I replied with a grin. "I'm merely a friend seeking clarity, not chaos." Up the 4 flights of stairs I went, the familiar tension brewing, like the anticipation of a feast. Knocking on the door, I waited with half a breath until it swung ajar, revealing Francesca, clad in a form-fitting crimson dress that embraced her curves with both grace and danger. "Mr. Goodwin," she purred, the low timbre of her voice wrapping around me like silk. "What an unexpected pleasure! Can a man not visit a friend without fear of needing an invitation stamped in gold?" I countered, stepping into the living room robust with eclectic furnishings. "I see you've been up to more than mere caprice of late. Shouldn't you be more concerned with the company you keep, Archie?" she quipped, cheeks flushed, yet the light in her eyes flickered. Charmed by banter I am, as are our shadowy acquaintances. I settled into the plush couch. "Hargrove was lurking when I visited last." Her posture stiffened for only a moment, but was swiftly masked by a smile as calculated as the volume of her cigarette smoke coiling through the air. "He does have a way of materializing, doesn't he? Men like Hargrove rarely vanish when there are secrets in play." "Exactly the point," I replied, not missing the consternation in her gaze. "What do you know about his dealings?" "Nothing I would care to discuss over a measly glass of Madeira," she retorted, her laughter bordering on the ironic. It was then our tete-a-tete was darkened by another entrance, the same clammy visage that had invaded our previous meeting. The odour of malice clung to Hargrove. "Francesca, darling," he croaked, a self-satisfied smirk stretching across his thick lips. "I see you have company." "Not your concern, Hargrove. I was merely enjoying a delightful chat with an esteemed gentleman," Francesca retorted, but I sensed the shift in her poise, as if she might shatter at the mere pressure of his presence. "Esteemed? Or just another pawn?" Hargrove observed, piercing me with his beady gaze. "The problem with your men, Francesca, is they are always for sale. Then why don't you offer a fair offer? Or are you only dealing in folly, as per your character?" I replied, engaging the tension that had become palpable. Now, is this any way to speak to your lord and master?" Hargrove grabbed onto a nearby table, a questioning glimmer in his eye, while I could almost taste the dread in Francesca's future. "Good men rarely recognize such demigods," I shot back, a firm resolve stealing my courage. "What secrets are you hiding about Louis Devereux?" "Hiding?" Hargrove mocked, his lips curling into a disdainful smile. "That is absurd, Goodwin. Louis is merely a boy lost in the labyrinth of ambition, and ambition can cost dearly. It can also lead to ruin, plain and simple." I inclined toward Francesca. "What do you know of his endeavours? The lady clearly knows more than she lets on, and I would hate to see her take a misstep." "I have no more to contribute than you in your fanciful tasks," Francesca interjected, her voice regal yet tinted with trepidation. Hargrove's impatience began to boil over, igniting a glimpse of fury in his eyes. "Enough, the lot of you. Truth is, you're all just following the smoke. You haven't the vision to see the flame. The boy will burn himself alive. Come, Hargrove, let us not reduce your inklings to mere flames of fancy," I countered, lightly diverting attention from Francesca's sudden tension. But Hargrove merely scoffed. "Fine, play the fool. Mark my words, Francesca, you'll regret where your focus lands." As he pivoted to leave, he stopped short at the door, his sneer morphing into a dangerous promise. "And Goodwin, stay out of affairs that don't concern you. Death can be quite indiscriminate." With the door ominously clicking shut, the room fell into an uncanny silence. I turned to Francesca, watching her compose herself like a debutante in distress. That was less charming than anticipated. No? I stepped closer, outweighing the tension with sharper focus. "Why don't we leave the gallant charade behind, Archie?" she replied plaintively. "It's the men who hold the cards, and I'm the one set to lose." "Or to gain precious new insight," I said, an idea blossoming. "If we are to find Louis, it takes the art of the chase. Surely you have allies among your crowd?" She paused, her features betraying a glimmer of decision as she contemplated the debts she might owe. "There are whispers, but I fear for their value. Dames like you tend to hold far more than mere beauty, and more than deadly agendas," I suggested, tilting my head toward her. "However, you're the one who will need to direct your influence. We will navigate the waters together." "Together? Yet separate. You men always seem to think it simpler than it is," she warned. "No simpler, no more treacherous. But if you lead, and I stay back, I'm betting Louis won't turn to ash." With the clock ticking intertwining our fate, we left that room behind, chasing more than queries. The step into the dark labyrinth loomed heavy, but together We would unveil whatever deadly allure awaited beneath the gilded charm of Manhattan's underbelly. Chapter 4. The Lies We Tell. The evening draped itself languidly over the city, a languorous air settling within the confines of Wolfe's brownstone as the last golden rays of sunlight retreated beyond the horizon. I positioned myself comfortably in the armchair opposite my employer, observing the flickering shadows on the wall while the books in Wolfe's library stood sentinel, witnesses to our nightly debates. My hat had been tossed carelessly onto the mahogany side table, remnants of my venture clinging to its brim like the remnants of civilization in this sonorous sanctuary. Wolfe, his frame enveloped in his lumbering armchair, glared at the steaming plate in front of him, the staccato that had made its way here through the capable hands of Fritz, who had outdone himself once more. "Archie," Wolfe began, his voice thick with irritation, "must you persist in the belief that my affection for staccato will ever trump my regard for sanity? You've been in an unseemly predicament with that woman, Francesca. I gather some fresh horrors have come to light. Some might call it a dalliance worthy of drama," I replied, leaning back with a self-satisfied smile. "But truly, I've seen nefarious men and charming dames entangled in worse. Hargrove is a rancid carrot, and Francesca, well, she's a bit too enamoured with the smoke for my taste. Yet there's a glimmer of truth behind that jewelled facade." Wolfe adjusted his spectacles, nearly allowing a growl to escape his lips. Truth, like quality paint, is oft hidden beneath layers. What preposterous evasion of clarity do you propose I entertain? I placed my elbows on the armrests, summoning my inner dramatist. Hargrove seeks a boy, a lad named Louis Devereux, who's entwined in whatever underworld deals those two shadowy figures conjure. It's a tangled web, but I managed a peek at a glimmer of a clue. A peek, Archie? You've grown adept at lateral thinking, half a degree away from sheer futility, as is my observation. What precisely is this clue? I saw Louis spectating at a saloon on the Lower East Side, deferring to the wrong company. Thinks he can play a game without suffering the consequences. A young man too consumed by pride to realize the fire. He dances around. An illustration of youth's folly. The subtle intertwining of secrets, lies, and flammable ambitions is often fascinating, but the question of practical relevance remains. Did you ascertain anything of merit? I leaned forward, fully indulging in the narrative. As fate would have it, the saloon buzzed with more than just whiskey-laden banter. An old contact of mine, Tony Crimson Rossellini, if he still goes by that name, was eyeing the crowd like a hawk with a penchant for feathers. He knows about Louis, and is a close confidant of Hargrove. Our dear boy could be less of a pawn, and more of a wandering knight at the behest of those murkier motives. Wolfe's interest ignited behind his heavy brow, deepening the furrows on his forehead. Crimson is a creature best left untouched by daylight, or your clumsy inquiries, Archie. Yet, if he or anyone else spins tales worthy of our consideration, it becomes imperative to glean their honesty. Consider this done. I'll pay him a visit, disguised, no doubt, as I haven't the gall to tread into that den of iniquity without proper camouflage. I reached for my coat, igniting a spark of excitement, but Wolfe's voice halted my retreat. Archie, do keep in mind that while subterfuge is sometimes required, discernment is perilously more valuable when approaching dens of scum. Protocol, over inspissated swagger, if you please. Understood, dictator of all things culinary, I mused, offering a mock salute before stepping out into the night. The brisk air of late autumn nipped at my collar as I navigated the streets, a dark underbelly alive with shadows that breathed secrets. My destination, the Roaring Stag, was a saloon painted with the colours of revelry and desperation, where men cloaked their ambitions in whiskey and laughter. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the muted clamour of lives entwined in a dangerous game. I slipped into a corner, leaning against the wall to observe the crowd through half-lidded eyes, ready to catch sight of my quarry. Inebriated laughter bubbled, while at the bar's edge, Tony Crimson was engaged in conversation, his beady eyes scanning the room like a spider awaiting prey. "Whiskey." "Neat," I requested, nodding at the bartender, who instantly recognized my intent. A moment later, the amber liquid was warming my insides when I turned my focus back to Crimson. "What's a boy like you doing in a pit like this?" he remarked as soon as I settled beside him at the bar, his tone deceptively convivial. "Could ask the same of you, Tony, but I might hazard a guess. Watching for pigeons who might warm the feathers of your nest." I leaned in, deliberately, lowering my voice. "I hear you have a bone to pick with Hargrove over his little game involving Devereux." "Devereux?" Crimson's brow furrowed momentarily. "Why would you bring that up on such a charming evening?" "Oh, I have a vested interest in our fair-weather friend. More importantly, I'm curious about what deal Hargrove might cut you into." He chuckled with a dry, venomous edge. "Curiosity oft leads there," he said, gesturing toward a darkened corner where rakes and rogues pulled shadows around their shoulders. "Risky business, Archie. The boy's in over his head, as you'd probably already surmise. And that's where it gets interesting, Tony. If he's in it for more than loose change, we might need to look deeper. I believe he's caught in a snare of ambitions he's yet to recognize. Is this where you cast your net wide?" he teased, his lips curving into an unsettling grin. "Watch yourself, Goodwin. Devereux is but a player. Hargrove hides the master blueprint." "What's a mastermind if he's left blind?" I countered, my resolve palpable. "Louis may just be your ticket to a more solid footing." Crimson's eyes narrowed, the humour evaporating faster than the whiskey around us. "Flies are attracted to sugar, but they drown in their own persistence. Protect your own skin while you're at it, Archie. Not all machinations are meant to be played." But before I could respond, the door swung open with a fierce gust, drawing every eye toward the entrance. Francesca entered, her presence shimmering like a blade drawn in the dark. The crowd hushed, the familiar tension bruised yet freshly released. "Archie!" she called out, her voice piercing the smoky air. "A word, if you will," I excused, myself, confidence bolstered by her affection. "Excuse me, Tony. It seems my gamble has drawn another player to the table." Francesca led me outside, where shadows danced around the alleyway, mingling with the unease on her face. "He's on to us, Archie," she whispered urgently, wringing her hands. "Hargrove is planning something. I overheard him. He's making arrangements to cut ties with Louis. Speak to Crimson directly." "Crimson's a slippery one, but knows far more than he lets on," I replied, my intuition igniting with a sense of urgency. We need to confront Hargrove and give him reason to believe we know his game. But before I could expound further, Hargrove's voice, oily and festering, slithered from the depths of the alleyway. Such whispers are best left untested, ladies. The knight transformed as he emerged from the shadows, dressed sharply but exuding malice, as familiar as the scent of burnt tobacco. Why don't we illuminate the truth behind our little charade, shall we? One thing was clear. The lies we told were finally unravelling around us, like a careless spool of string. Hargrove's network quivered with impending betrayal as I cast a sidelong glance at Francesca. Together we stood at the precipice of something monumental, each deceit a stepping stone leading straight into the maw of an inevitable confrontation. Truthfully, Hargrove, I declared, stepping forward, I have one secret left to share. The truth tends to burn brighter when fate meets resolve. His smirk faltered momentarily, the tension tightening like a snare. Francesca mirrored my resolve, a hidden fierceness ignited behind her eyes. In that moment, we were no longer players in a game. We were the architects constructing a riddle that the shadows pressing down upon us had never anticipated. The pieces would fall into place as we sliced through the thicket of lies, carving our way to the heart of darkness. Chapter 5. The Blood-Red Handkerchief. The night had settled over Manhattan like a murky fog, and I was back in the sanctuary of Wolfe's brownstone, where shadows mingled with the scent of simmering staccato wafting through the air like an invitation to indulgence. I leaned against the edge of Wolfe's massive desk, lazily flipping through a stack of ominous correspondence, while Wolfe himself sat ensconced in his usual armchair, enveloped by an ample padding of opulence that could only be a vestige of his many years of indulgence. "Archie, my patience wears as thin as a French crepe," he murmured, peering over his half-moon glasses with a hint of ire, as he pushed aside a plate containing a half-eaten portion of his beloved staccato. "Pray tell, how many more of your clever entanglements must I endure before you retrieve the intelligence to keep me adequately entertained? Patience is not your strong suit, is it?" I quipped, attempting to reflect his irritation with a dash of levity. "But I do have news, substantive, if a trifle nefarious." Wolfe sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of 1,000 grievances. "If it involves Hargrove or Devereux, may I recommend a more palatable route to enlightenment? It is my understanding that whatever passes between you two is as delicate as the finest china." I waved off his dramatics with a flourish. I assure you, my dear Wolfe, this is not merely social chit-chat." Francesca wasn't just a shrill voice in the night. She had something substantial to share with me. A long, languid stretch filled the silence, and Wolfe's curiosity began to sparkle beneath the heavy brow furrows. "Intriguing. You hold court with that woman at your own peril, perhaps. But I held aloft a trophy tonight," I said, reaching into my coat pocket. I displayed a blood-red handkerchief, its fabric plush yet stained, as if it had survived an encounter with despair. "Found it near the back door of the Roaring Stag during my last escapade. It seems our dear friend Hargrove has a penchant for leaving evidence at unsavoury crime scenes. Distasteful! A mortifying lack of discipline." Wolfe pointed a finger that I was certain would have poked me had he not withheld from physical exertion. "Is it of significance, or merely momentous in its vivid coloration?" I leaned in, eager to seize my moment. The initials, H.M. They belong to Hargrove's late associate, Malcolm Weller, a man who knew his way around shadows. And now that he's dead, Hargrove may have more to account for than clever wordplay. Wolfe's glacial gaze met mine, channels of thought coursing rapidly behind those thick glasses. Crime earns an audience. Malcolm Weller was lost to the great game, yet his threads linger. What do you propose we do about these tawdry revelations? Confront Hargrove, and see if he unravels under scrutiny. If he's as guilty as I suspect, the blood-red hanky may serve as our invitation. Wolfe stroked his chin thoughtfully, the slightest hint of a smirk curling his lips. An invitation indeed. But you, my dear Archie, will bear the burden of connecting those dots. I shall persevere in comfort while you engage in the chore of inquiry. Unfathomable, yet predictable. I offered a mock salute and donned my coat. I'll be back with more than mere words by dawn. The cold New York air bit at me fiercely as I traversed the city, the echoes of my own footsteps keeping company with the distant jazz that flowed from corner bars. The roaring stag greeted me like an old friend, full of characters with secrets cloaked in the heavy haze of smoke and stolen laughter. As I settled onto a stool at the far end of the bar, I scanned the crowd for any telltale signs of Hargrove. It wasn't long before I spotted him, seated in a booth enveloped in brash company, his arrogance parading like a prize-fighter. "Archie," he drawled, spotting me and beckoning me into his orbit. "What brings you into my humble abode tonight? I trust you've not succumbed to the charms of subterfuge." "Just coexisting amongst the spirits," I replied, sliding into the booth with deliberate ease, "and seeking a word with you about your former associate." His smirk sharpened, revealing the predator lurking beneath the decorum. "Weller? Dead men tell no tales, my friend. What do you think you can glean from a wisp of air?" Oddly enough, a blood-red handkerchief does not breathe well. I produced the handkerchief, allowing the fabric to unfurl and lay against the table like a scandal. "And this belongs to you, does it not?" He recoiled slightly, eyes narrowing. "What is the meaning of this impudence? It's a prelude to your downfall, if you can't recognize it. Hargrove, were you involved in Weller's demise? Don't bother with theatrics. We can either dance around the truth or knock heads until it's revealed." Hargrove scanned the room for prying eyes, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. This wasn't just about preserving a facade for him. It was about survival. "I don't know what balderdash you've spun, Archie, but you do well to consider that evidence isn't the same as guilt. Malcolm was a calculated risk of business, a loose end tied up nicely, and you're mere cannon fodder in a war too grand for your ideals. It's one thing to play chess with men, it's another to sacrifice pawns willingly." I leaned closer, smelling the musk of deceit clinging to him. "I'll admit, the tangled webs of your ambitions intrigue me, but your hands will be burned if you don't handle them with care." "My hands, Archie?" he hissed, fingers twitching. "You haven't the foggiest notion of what's at stake. This staccato evenings are best left at home behind doors that keep the innocent away." I pushed to my feet, bolstered by a rising tide of righteous indignation. "Yet, here's the twist, Hargrove. That blood-red shroud shall hang around your neck if you don't learn accountability. Perhaps, if the night swallows you whole, I'll remember our encounter as merely a flickering flame. As I strode out, a shattering glass echoed behind me, and I didn't need to look back to see his face ignited with fury. The streets welcomed me back with shadowy arms, buoyed by a sense that the tides were shifting. The pieces were in place, and the game had irrevocably changed. A blood-red handkerchief was simply an enticement, a way to unmask a monster hiding behind charming words. And tomorrow I would confront Wolfe with the assurance that we were closer to the truth. Chapter 6. Smoke and Mirrors. The door of Wolfe's brownstone swung open with a resounding creak, ushering me into the familiar folds of shadow and comfort. A dense haze of aromatic cigars and simmering garlic wafted through the air. Wolfe had not only settled into his armchair, but had also made a thorough inspection of the day's culinary victories, as evidenced by a pathetically unfinished platter of antipasti on his desk. "Archie, your late arrival is a thunderous affront to my idle sensibilities," he remarked, his voice saturated with equal parts annoyance and hunger. He adjusted his half-moon glasses, the glint of their lenses belying a keen intellect hardly dulled by his languor. "News doesn't wait for dinner, Wolfe," I retorted, feigning exasperation while reaching for a deceptively innocuous-looking olive. "And though I regret interrupting your tasting extravaganza, I come bearing matters of some import. Please indulge yourself," he replied, waving a hand toward a chair, eyes narrowing. "I'll endure what remains of my meal, while you regale me with the sordid details of your moonlighting among the serpents of Manhattan." Settling into the chair, I could feel the weight of his gaze probing for nuances. "Hargrove's not merely a charmer in a well-tailored suit. He's a viper and a falcon. He knows how to strike, and worse, he recognizes the fleeting nature of alliances." Such poetic struggles mean little if not accompanied by concrete outcomes, Wolfe interjected, lifting a piece of prosciutto delicately, relishing in its texture before swallowing. "And there is a collection of empty words that precede an elusive reality." I drew a breath deep enough to pull in not only the air, but also the gravity of the moment. I played the game well, but I went in for the kill and unearthed only hints. Hargrove appeared unfazed, dismissive even. The further I probed, the more he retreated, like a crab scurrying into its shell. Wolfe's eyebrows arched into unmistakable interest. "Then what did you procure of tangible substance from this apparent confrontation? Or did you simply entertain his sadistic pleasure as he played puppeteer?" I produced the blood-red handkerchief, from its confines folded neatly, in my pocket. This morsel caught his attention as much as it piqued mine. "HM!" He flinched. The deceitful shadows cast upon his soul revealed a flicker of vulnerability. Malcolm Weller's demise hangs heavy over Hargrove Wolfe. The dull thud of Furk, Wolfe's fork ceased in mid-air. Ah yes, Malcolm, a tangible loss. And yet, what is a single handkerchief to a man who commands a fleet of lies? Formidable foes collapse with the weight of their own monstrosities, yet they seldom do so without a twisted respite. Fascinating philosophizing, but what I require is a plan. I shot back, still reeling from his flair for the dramatics. You've always been a craftsman of precision. Now might be the time to arrange our pieces on the board. He regarded me for a moment, sheer insouciance replaced by a formidable resolve. Allow me to point out the laborious truth. Every checkmate begins with the pawn, and yours might be to unwind a web of hedonistic glee that Hargrove has carefully constructed in his sanctuary. You mean the roaring stag? It's filled to the brim with his sycophants, I replied, the edges of my optimism sharpened by a newfound clarity. But if we can't ensnare him just yet, perhaps we exploit the ambience of the place instead. Gather what they're unwinding, rend the curtain open, and let the shadows spill forth. Wolfe leaned forward, the shadows of his countenance glistening against the low light. And then, dear Archie, assemble the paraphernalia of the evening's mischief, and do it with that brash charm I so admire. I shall remain here, where I can exercise my talent for detachment while you collect our spoils. With a swift nod, I darted back into the teeming streets, the pulse of Manhattan alive around me as I made my way to the roaring stag once again. The jazz poured from the joints of the building, arms loaded with laughter and murmurs hiding secrets bred in vice and desperation. Prowling through the throngs of revellers, I settled myself at the bar, where memories of Hargrove's disdain still echoed. The lights dimmed further, casting jaundiced shadows upon the faces of the patrons. I ordered a drink, mischief concealed in the recesses of my mind, ready to ensnare the laughable lies spilling from their mouths. The prodigal son returns, crooned a sultry voice cloaked in mist as Francesca approached, eyes twinkling like artifice beneath the low haze. Back from traversing the labyrinth, have you? I motioned her closer, the urgency of our shared cause palpable. Hargrove's on edge, and it thickens the air. In his arrogance lies ignorance of the truth that's slowly trickling back. I leaned closer. I'll need you to stir up the revellers, pull the threads while I weave a net of inquiry. A mischievous smile danced on her lips, but also something cautious. Do you trust him to play along with your game? She asked, eyebrow arched. More than I trust a spider not to spin. I winked, and together we began to maneuver through the knots of conversation weaving around us. It wasn't long before murmurs revealed secrets, hushed conversations about deals fallen through, camaraderie once reliable now barely together. "Well, look who's slinking into the underbelly!" Hargrove's voice exclaimed, brittle and cutting, unravelling the moment's tension. He had appeared, gliding through the haze of uncertainty with a glimmer of challenge amidst his bravado. Flanking him were his drunken sycophants. "Have you come to bask in my glory, or beg for scraps?" "Merely a convenient rendezvous with a few truths, Hargrove," I replied coolly. "You know how the air can shift when secrets intertwine. Good luck digging for truth in a flooded swamp." "Tread carefully, Archie," he countered, but with something in the tone that hinted at a softening edge. Behind him, a young woman adorned with glinting jewels leaned forward, her eyes filled with mischief. Care to wager whether or not it is the state of truth he seeks, or merely the thrill of delusion? Hargrove provides enough light to illuminate shadows. The trick is to ascertain which ones reflect beyond him. Francesca whispered beside me, emboldening our need to press forward. "Perhaps I will sweep away your foundation," Hargrove announced, any hint of joviality fading into menace. "You peer too deeply, Archie. Reality can burn, and behind frayed curtains, mirrors can shatter. The surge of animosity spiraled around us. I gripped my drink, razor wit sharpening the weight of my words. Your subtlety eludes you, Hargrove. The mirage is but a whisper. It can wither like dreams at dawn. In that moment of confrontation, as shadows clashed against the harsh light of truth, a revelation dawned. Hargrove crumpled slightly. The confidence remained, yet I saw the shadows ripple at the edges of his comely veneer. All it took was a flicker of fear, then a burst of laughter, deftly navigated outside our bout of wordplay. Submit to the inevitable, a sinner enchained, I said. And there, within the fog of belief, the pieces aligned themselves closer. I've had enough of this. Hargrove seethed, bluster slipping into panic. Archie, you're only a step away from falling flat yourself. Is that so? I whispered, audacity shimmering like a blade beneath the surface. This time, the dance leads where you hoped it wouldn't. With that, Hargrove stumbled. Beneath the weight of his implications, shadows cascading against the walls, revealing layers of deceit hidden beneath his polished facade. In that serpentine weave, I glimpsed the truth. The only mirror that mattered hung before us, and it was one he couldn't escape. Returning home later, I found Wolfe deep in slumber, a half-eaten plate still resting beside him. "My dear Archie," he murmured as I entered, "what culinary revelation has the night offered?" "A banquet of lies, Wolfe," I replied with a wry smile. "And though something reveals itself in shadows, I learned that even in smoke and mirrors one must watch where they tread, or else risk being undone." Wolfe sighed, the ghost of a grin crossing his lips. "Then I'll embroider a tapestry of languor till morning, my dear man. I trust your appetite remains vigour sufficient, as we are far from concluding this jest." Chapter 7. The Jazzman and the Gunshot. The evening air was stifling, heavy with the scent of sweat, smoke, and regret, as I stepped into the dim confines of the Roaring Stag. The band played a sultry jazz number, the horn notes coaxing the patrons to sway in rhythm with their despair. I found myself wedged between revellers whose laughter was, more often than not, a mask for something darker. With Francesca and her sly charm flitting somewhere near, I considered how to break the tension that bound me and Hargrove. Then it came, a sudden crack that ruptured the music's sultry embrace. A gunshot, sharp and unforgiving, shattered the relaxed atmosphere like a dropped glass. I dove for cover, the pursuit of trivialities fleeing my mind as I instinctively sought safety behind the weight of a nearby table. The sound ricocheted through the dimly lit establishment, and bodies fell into a panic, the jazz notes now swallowed in chaos. "Archie!" Francesca's voice cut through the din, punctuated by frantic movements. She peered over the edge of O'Ear booth, her eyes wide with an unexpected combination of thrill and terror. "What did you get us into?" "An evening with Hargrove," I shot back, my heart racing. "Can't quite say it was on my schedule." "More on Hargrove's than yours, it seems," she hissed, looking around for our corrosive socialite. The jazz musicians, long accustomed to the thickness of vices swirling in the smoke, faltered and hesitated, a telltale sign of a hasty retreat. As the crowd surged like a wave, I pulled Francesca down beside me. "We need to find out what's happening before we get stampeded to death by a herd of sycophants." "Your sense of urgency is overwhelming, Archie," she responded, a quirk of her lips emerging, betraying her disdain for the ever-looming horror of the moment. "Think your cornered viper is responsible." Buzzing around us, the panic intensified, but I sensed it. Out of chaos emerges clarity. "We need to find Hargrove," I commanded, wary of losing my companion in the tangle. Francesca nodded, her gaze searching through the confused throngs. We were part of a disorganized tableau, painted in a blend of fear and desperation. But I moved with intention. Spotting the glint of shimmering jewelry, I made my way toward the direction of the bar. Hargrove would be hiding behind bravado and bravura. That much I knew. As we wove through the scattering bodies, another panicked shell burst. "Someone shot the jazzman!" A young woman gasped, shrieking over the fray. My mind raced back to the jubilant figure of the trumpeter, whose melodies once curled through the night like smoke. "Hargrove!" I called out, twisting my head from left to right. "Where are you? We need your—" Suddenly there he stood, flanked by his sycophants, looking even more dishevelled than usual. "Archie, what fresh insanity is this?" he barked, an incredulous smile barely disguising his excitement. "Insanity? Oh, just your everyday pleasure of dodging homicide," I replied, eyebrows raised. "But how come you're not turning tail like the rest?" "I don't scare so easily," he retorted with the bravado wrapping tighter around him. "And besides," he leaned closer, "it's an opportunity for a spectacle." "Really, Hargrove, perhaps your appetite should tread cautiously. There's a body—" Before I could finish my thought, Hargrove's gaze shifted to the exit, where an entourage of officers swarmed in, lanterns sweeping through the rafters as if searching for clues in a dance hall. Their advanced steps rang with authority, but the sense of unease I had seen reflected in a myriad of startled eyes was somehow lost on Hargrove, whose countenance glimmered. "Play it cool, Archie," he laughed grimly, covering the tension with wit. "It's a haven of crime. They won't find anything. Jazz is for the brave, and so is life, except for the poor soul with the trumpet in his hands." I interjected. "He's more likely to find himself in the lap of Karen than the comfort of jazz. Ah, but that's the beauty of it, isn't it?" He arched an eyebrow, revelling in the chaos. "All this morbid speculation, did you ever consider it might have all been intended?" I narrowed my eyes as uncertainty crept into my mind. "Intended? You mean there's someone playing the strings far more sinister than the band?" "I don't know, Archie," Francesca added, concern threading her tone. "But whoever did this isn't just some amateur. They aimed at someone. You have to admit that this smacks of a compact. Let's not burden ourselves with the bleeding heart." Hargrove chuckled, leaning closer. "Let the truth rise to the surface of this murky pond." A few more officers were passing by, their muttered conversations reaching my ears, yet tangling with the growing crowd's noise. I pushed through the throng, desperation pulling me toward the bar where a small group of onlookers hovered, their eyes glued to the fading body of the trumpeter sprawled among the flotsam of fallen drinks. Francesca's hand grasped my arm, shaking with a newfound urgency. "Let's do something!" Rage coursed through me. The one thing I couldn't abide was cowardice. "What do you mean?" I asked through clenched teeth. "Gaze upon a tragedy?" "We need to find out about Archie." She nodded towards the crowd. "He was spooked before the gunshot rang out." Maybe he saw something we didn't. I turned back to Hargrove, now increasingly aware of his detached demeanour. You were close to him. What was he involved in? Too many things, my dear. Archie, too many things. Hargrove's eyes danced like silver coins over a cauldron. Perhaps tonight's the time for the full reveal. I swiveled my attention back to Francesca, whose determined expression spoke louder than any clamouring patron. Let's track down that ghost before he slips away, or worse, falls into the arms of blues. We slipped through the shadows, weaving our path toward the exit as I glanced over my shoulder one last time at Hargrove, his smirk both amused and abominable. Never a dull moment when you're around, Archie, he called out, grinning. Just remember, shadows always return. Outside the Stag, we found Artie behind a brick wall, panic spilling from his air. His eyes bore scars from glimpsed horrors. It was an unmistakable magnetism that hovered just beyond the ill-lit safety. Artie, I soothed, my voice low but insistent. What did you see? He shook his head, fear coating his words like an ill taste. It's not safe. Someone's playing for keeps. Then let's inquire further before they claim you as their next plaything, Francesca urged, stepping. Be forward. What did you witness? The new guys, Artie stammered, came in looking for trouble. I tried to steer clear, but they know how to spot a mark. Revelation struck me like a note in a symphony. Are you saying someone here orchestrated the chaos, involved in the execution? Francesca's eyes locked onto mine as we pieced the shadows together. If anyone's been firing at a note instead of just a trumpet, then our charming Hargrove might just be next on that list, I concluded, a wry smile creeping over my lips. Turns out, it wasn't just murder this time. It was a daring exit in noir. In that moment, the abrupt reality of danger crystallized. Yet a thread of pathos filled the air, glistening like the fading echo of jazz. हमारे करिश्मे की बात है, सबसे अच्छा होने की. And so Manhattan held its breath, secrets coiling deeper into the twisting shadows as we began chasing the melody of truth. Chapter 8. A Body in the Alley. The moon hung low, casting an ethereal glow over the narrow stretch of pavement behind the roaring Stag. My instincts, honed after countless escapades with Wolfe, told me I was in over my head again. Archie, I muttered to myself as I stepped over the bodies of twisted shadows. What did you bring yourself into? The night air was heavy with the scent of damp asphalt and yesterday's rain, marked with a faint hint of something metallic. I hadn't intended to catch a glimpse of a corpse that evening, but it seemed fate had offered me a dreadful encore. Disgusting, a voice groaned behind me. Your routine never ceases to amuse, Archie. I turned to face the familiar visage of Nero Wolfe, albeit phantasmagoric in the dark. I'd hardly classify stumbling upon a dead body as part of my usual merriment, Wolfe, I replied. Still, it seems the universe has conspired to theatre this macabre drama. His brow furrowed slightly as he leaned back, arms folded over, his ample belly. You are learning at last. I expect you to extricate yourself from this vile rehearsal with the elegance of a high-class dancer. Last I checked, I said, anticipating his ire, it's not the dancers who end up in alleys. He waved an indifferent hand. a truffle no doubt, travelling from his pantry to his mouth. This is not an exploration into your culinary skills, Archie. You are to ensure we do not become entangled in the local constabulary's fancies. Find out what transpired. If I thought the lively fare of the stag was risky, I replied, eyes scanning the ground for more than just bloodstains, that would be child's play compared to what I'm staring at now. The jazzman's demise will be the least of our worries if we don't stay charges clear. Then, with deliberate intent, Wolfe prompted, retrieve the facts. Doubling back to sniff the carcass afterward, if you must, will yield no applause, if assassination is the modus operandi. Very reassuring, as always, I said, adjusting my collar with a huff. The alley was devoid of the warmth the bar's atmosphere had lent, and the coldness seeped into my bones. I stepped closer to the dark figure sprawled across the cobblestones. I could hardly identify the triggers of panic lurking beyond the potential for death. I knelt beside the body and squinted against the inadequate illumination. The pallor of the victim's face was illuminated enough to reveal the unkempt strands of hair that framed it. Familiar, yet sinister. Artie, I whispered, recognizing the trumpet player from earlier. Does your luminary influence extend to the afterlife? Wolfe intoned dryly, filling the space with his unmistakable sarcasm. Let's not be hasty, I countered, a growing knot forming in my stomach. Could have been a witness, not the subject of the gunman's intention. After all, he was terrified before the chaos erupted. We need to consider his connections. A rustle from behind drew my attention. That you, Archie? A raspy voice called. It was Francesca darting from behind a dumpster, like an apparition. Her bright, observant gaze flickered from me to the vehicle of death, her expression leaving no uncertainty about her own horror. What is this? She gasped, creasing her brow in concern. Artie? Oh, dear Lord, no! I jumped to my feet and forced her to look away. Don't dwell on what has happened. Focus on who wanted this. A gunman does not always aim at the right target. Then the crowd surely must have helped, she whispered, scouring the dark behind her with a glimmer of hope, as if the shadows might conspire to divulge the truth. Did you learn anything of note at the bar? Only that Hargrove's bravado could do with more than a dash of fear, I replied, my urgency mounting. But this isn't watchmaker's business, and we can't count on caprice alone. Not until we've delved deeper. Then let's fetch your Lord of the Brownstone, while the scent is fresh, she asserted, her determination sparking the air around us. If he's insistent on keeping his brilliance preserved under that wretched moss of his, he ought to get out here. I wouldn't go so far, I cautioned, as dread seeped back into the moment. The last thing Wolfe wishes to surrender is the sanctity of his pantry. She spun in a barely contained storm of indignation. This has escalated to murder. Lassitude be damned. I'll not let him lock the door to his mind again. Very well, I relented. Let's see what the local scenery might conjure into view. I took Francesca's arm, moved out of the alley, and back toward the vibrant pulse of the city. Exceptional, Wolfe drawled as we entered his sanctuary. His presence filled the brownstone like the sense of a sumptuous feast. You return, with an accessory to my dinner table, an unshed tear over misfortune. Am I to surmise the investigation has yielded richness? I locked eyes with Wolfe, relaying a hint of gravity. Artie's eternally silenced. He's gone cold, and without so much as a forgiveness to share. Then tell me, what amusement is buried under the stasis of mortality? Wolfe inquired, plucking a succulent peach from the table as if contemplating an offering instead of loss. Your appetite for pulchritude astounds, I said, suppressing a grin. The man was a pawn in a game much larger than mere rivalry. There's a pulse behind the darkness, and Hargrove's stagecraft has us at bay. He would do well not to underestimate our motives tonight. And how entertaining to watch from the plush recesses of imagination, indeed, Wolfe concluded with a wave of his hand, never seeming to divert his focus from the freshly gathered fruits on the table. Tell me of these motives, Archie. What of his opulence? I let out a slow breath, evaluating one last chance to encapsulate the facts before diving deeper into the murky waters of deceit. His motivations might not be the only concern, I said. In the realm of brass instruments and the allure of the past, the lines seem impossibly blurred. But one thing now reads clear. The melody switches, and we're not prepared to let those shadows control our fate. With that, I turned to Wolfe, determination kindling once more. Now, precisely what is it you propose? Propose? He raised an incredulous eyebrow. You know me far too well. But the insipid light of sordid humanity clearly needs illuminating. Find our interloper swiftly. The swan of red in this chamber shall seek meaning but within reason. He paused, lips curling into a gentle smirk. Retrieve Artie's last notes before all taste turns sour. I believe it is time for chords to sound their notes of revelation. Light mingled with the night, promises coiling, and a deeper dance upon the surface awaited us as the streets of New York beckoned once more into the murky depths of truth behind the shadows. Chapter 9. The Other Side of Midnight. With the city's heart pulsating outward, I made my way through the shadowed streets of Manhattan, which wore the cloak of night with ease. Neon signs blinked like distant stars, competing with the cool light of the moon. Yet even in the hushed embrace of darkness, the echo of Artie's final notes reverberated in my mind, a ghostly reminder that life here could change as abruptly as a misplaced melody. As I approached the brownstone, the allure of Wolfe's culinary exploits wafted through the cracks of the slightly ajar door. I stepped inside to the familiar sanctuary of Wolfe's domain, the thick aroma of his latest creation enveloping me like a velvet shawl. His presence filled the room, large and commanding, barely disturbed by the pallor of death that had made our earlier outing so grotesquely pivotal. He sat at the dining table, his ample frame dwarfing the elegant spread of duck à l'orange, his most illustrious meal, whose preparations, I knew, had required the precision of a maestro. "You are late, Archie," he remarked, lifting a slice of the golden-skinned bird to his lips, not quite masking his annoyance. "Your ventures outside these walls wreak havoc on my timetable. Do you not consider that I have appetites to satisfy?" I leaned against the door, crossing my arms. My attention swept the tray of fruit, positioned enticingly to one side. Forgive me, Nero, but I was entangled in matters requiring some urgency, and, I hasten to add, a sense of obligation to consult oversight over a corpse. A corpse, you say? He lowered the meat, intrigued yet unimpressed. You find them habitually, like an actor seeking applause after empty theatrics. What amusing play had you caught this time? Artie the musician, or the late Artie, rather. He was shot down in an alley like a bereft trumpet blown out of tune. His brow arched, and then he resumed chewing. Decidedly uninterested in continuing our discussion, sans the delight of culinary morsels. I trust you saw to the matter intelligently. Intelligently and reluctantly. I stepped further into the room, the thick tapestry of tension drawing me closer to the table. I left Francesca with Artie's remains to gather information. She was shaken, but it's a good posture for investigation when the sleuth has her heart into the hunt. The irony is inescapable, Wolfe mused, tangled in the vines of emotions, and yet hoping to find unfurled truth. You must ensure her not to drown in sentiment. Easy to say, I shot back, amused by his typically detached logic, when you feast upon delectable morsels without the bother of a cold case. Enough, Wolfe chastised, waving me toward the kitchen while fixing his gaze back on his plate. If you insist on offering commentary, I shall let you entertain my company later. Present your discoveries plainly. With a sigh, I took a seat across from him, the fabric of the chair making a slight protest under my weight. The bullet was fired close and true, straight through Artie's heart. No question, this was intended murder. An orchestra of intent played here, yet the conductor remains anonymous. Wolfe picked at the fruit as if picking notes from a score. Your efforts lead me to ponder who would benefit from silencing a man with few claims to notoriety. To be honest, the same name keeps popping into my head, I replied. Hargrove. The theatrics, the tension he thrives on. He has everything to gain from extinguishing those who threaten his masterful performance. Your tendency to leap to conclusions is remarkable, Archie, but hardly unambiguous. Consider this. An unwelcome target is rarely selected without the whispers of patronage leading to an unwitting pawn. Patronage? You mean someone's pulling strings, guiding the attack with intent? Possibly Hargrove's hand wrapping around. His flute? Precisely. Wolfe leaned back, bolstered by the weight of revelation more than the meal before him. This layer of misdirection is an orchestrator's dream. Then we'll visit Hargrove, I stated, my instinct to engage, the nightlife flaring again. See if he's taken the final bow in this disturbing bout. Unpredictable, is it not? The house from which we each played our notes, leading to a dissonant end. Wolfe remarked, his words painting a tantalizing image. However, I insist you muster a modicum of caution. My profound lectures on the vagaries of human nature may appear wearisome, but I suspect Hargrove doesn't embrace discussions lightly. Do you ever embrace anything lightly? I quipped, adopting a posture of feigned innocence. Only when it pertains to culinary arts, my dear Archie. Now go. Though Wolfe remained rooted within his kingdom of flavour and intellect, I retreated into the cool city night, broken only by the skeletal shadows of buildings lining the blocks. The air crackled with a tension that hinted at secrets yet to unveil themselves. At the Stag, I found Hargrove seated at a corner table, swathed in luscious silence. A glass of bourbon perched in his fingers like a pas de deux of elegance and unease. He looked up as I approached, his eyes sharp as knives, framing a smile that didn't quite reach them. Archie, delightful to see you again. He beckoned me with that unwashed combination of charm and nefarious intent. "How fare you on, this tantalizing evening? What lies have you recounted in the silence?" I shot back, placing myself across the table, the tension twisting between us like smoke. "You were seen only days before Artie was shot. A trumpet without a breath." Hargroves' grin faltered, shadows deepening around his mind. What nonsense! Artie was a casualty of the streets. Those jazzmen are as doe-eyed as they come. They dance dangerously close to their demise. "Perhaps he was your chosen scapegoat," I suggested, striking an accusational chord. "Someone to silence those who might disrupt your lush plot." Her face took on a pallor, as if the shadows in the room had conspired to drain it. "You mistake me for a fool, Archie. I would not indulge such theatrics. Each note I play is meticulously arranged." "Meticulously concealed," I shot back, undeterred by his poise. "But I'll discover how much rhythm you tolerate when it starts to break. Your threats grow tiresome. You claim to pursue truth, but seem destined to dance only about the glittering edge." I leaned forward, the battle of words sharpening like polished steel. "I'm no stranger to dissonance, Hargrove. The orchestration you're conducting shadows you, and eventually you will be played out." That seemed to hit home. His eyes flared with an abrupt recognition, then flickered like a dying candle. "Perhaps you should take your poetic inclinations to the theatre. The last act often reveals more than the intermediate, a lesson many refuse to learn." "Perhaps," I conceded deftly, "but the lesson was learned long ago. You should never underestimate an encore, especially when the whispers grow louder, whether they come from beyond or referring only to the living." With that, I departed, leaving behind a man caught in a web of his own craftiness. Wolfe's deduction lingered in my mind with unshakable clarity, the truth twisted beneath the melodrama of Hargrove's life. A revelation waiting to surface, ready to shatter the fragile facade he had tied around himself. As I stepped back into the night, I smiled, for the sweetest elixirs awaited, intoxicating us in ways we had yet to fathom. The other side of midnight revealed the secrets that thrummed just beneath the surface, the very essence of the game we played. For its notes, like a haunting jazz refrain, beckoned us ever deeper into the chase. Chapter 10. Whispers of the Underworld. The persistent rain drizzled upon the unglamorous asphalt of Manhattan, transforming the streets into a glistening sea of shadows and muted colours. With each step, my shoes echoed through the half-abandoned alleys, splashing into puddles where the residue of yesterday's disappointments mingled with the torrent of the present. New York had a knack for cloaking its secrets, and I was determined to peel back the layers obscuring this one, but not without the unflagging shadow of my companion. I stepped into the oppressive warmth of the brownstone, grateful to escape the damp chill lurking in every corner of the city. As always, the rich aroma of spices and freshly baked bread greeted me, a stark reminder of the culinary artistry I'd left behind. Wolfe had remained, as was his penchant, indulging in his various delights while I ventured into the unrefined cadences of street life. Moments later, I plopped down in the leather chair opposite him, my legs stretched out beneath the gleaming surface of the dining table, now devoid of its previous artistry, the remnants of his concoction already whisked away by the deft hand of Fritz. "Exhausting, Archie?" Wolfe inquired, his voice languishing over each word like honey on bread, while he lifted a fork toward his mouth, the glint of silver flashing like a deftly aimed pistol. "Exhausted isn't quite what I'd call it, Nero," I replied, stifling a grin. "More like engaged in a dance with darkness, pirouetting through shadows that seem more lethal than charming." "Shadows, indeed," he murmured, eyes narrowing as he savoured another decadent bite. "The essence of romanticism has a certain allure, but the thrum of danger you feel is the grim narrative of human ambition. Would you care to enlighten me as to the nuances of your escapade?" "Eager as always," I chuckled lightly. "Let's just say a visit to Fagan's, an establishment that masquerades as a jazz club, afforded me an opportunity for some unpleasant revelations. Artie's murder is still fresh, but it's become spicy with the aroma of jealousy and greed. I think we're trailing the real performance now, but it's thick with players who prefer the shadows. But who leads?" Wolfe's gaze sharpened perceptibly, intrigue creeping into his otherwise disinterested demeanour. "What's the name that beckons from the void?" "Domingo Hargrove," I stated. "A man whose hands are stained both with ink and blood, the creator by day and puppeteer by night, if whispers are to be believed. He was at Fagan's last week, where I overheard fragments of a conversation worth noting. Notable as a signpost, but hardly definitive," he countered, setting his fork down with precision. "You are far more entertaining than a good book, Archie, yet I implore you not to allow your imagination to run afoul of remaining tethered to reality. What was this conversation?" Hargrove's minions were concerned, his allure dimmed by whispers of betrayal and underhanded dealings. It seems there's a lot more than meets the eye when the curtain is drawn. Several musicians are feeling quite disenchanted by their maestro's ambitions, and the musicians, like any good scandal in this city, seem more likely to pay with their lives than their loyalty. "Musicians," Wolfe clarified, leaning forward with a glimmer of interest in his eyes, "and intrigue abounds. The stage is a harmonious shell, housing discordant notes hidden amidst its stature. Did they have a name?" "Only vague allusions, but I suspect it's a woman. You know how the lines blur when a siren is in the centre. She's rising like foam upon the drink, but cast aside like the dregs," I explained. "Tamsin Laroche. She was mentioned as a damsel, with shadows long enough to cloak a dozen transgressions. They believe she could be the keystone to fragments of revelation. Feel we must visit her." "Your enthusiasm is invigorating," Wolfe replied, a frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Misdirection is as potent as any melody, Archie. Don't falter in your steps as you dance through its line. Beware, forthright truths often conceal tangled realities." "Caution is all well and good, but this is a swift-moving game," I said, rising from my chair and straightening my coat, "and I suppose it's also wise not to be late to an encore." With that, I slipped into the cool night once again, thoughts teeming with the dinner's aftermath, while anticipation hummed in my veins. The streets of New York were alive, echoing with whispers. Every night felt like an unpredictable sonata, a melody waiting only for a discerning ear. I soon found myself at Fagan's, the jazz seeping through the walls like honey-heavy dreams. A smooth, sultry saxophone wailed, weaving notes that caressed the heart and sent warmth through the assembled. Patrons, The dim lighting heightened the sense of uncertainty, casting elongated shadows where one could lose their very essence. Sliding onto a bar stool, I beckoned the bartender and uttered a simple order. "Club soda, please. I'm on a mission tonight." From Chide, the sound of it, I'd say every drink should come spiked with the thrill of pursuit, detective. The voice belonged to Tamsin LaRoche, as delicate as shimmering glass, yet edged with a steely resonance that cut through the din. She perched on the stool beside me, crimson waves cascading about her shoulders, sharp features softened by the dim light. "Fancy that! You are a man of intrigue." "Only when the situation permits, Miss LaRoche. A lovely evening for a confession, no?" She regarded me with a playful glint, an intriguing mix of caution and curiosity. "Is that why you're here? To drag me into your merry band of detectives thrumming through the alleys searching for a spectral trumpet?" Artie's fate swirls in the air, and you seem to know something about it. Let's compose a different tune here, shall we? Ayu leaned closer, hoping she would reveal what she concealed. "What do you know of Hargrove's touch?" Her eyes dimmed, shadows flickered within. "He plays fast and loose, and believe me, when a puppet is cut, threads unravel in an alarming fashion, detective." Artie had complaints, threats even, but he was little more than a shadow in a world that feasted on its own secrets. My sources mused upon those threats, Tamsin. Would anyone want him silenced? Perhaps even an unseen hand, she mused. Consider that Hargrove isn't the only one conducting an orchestra. Feuds stir, and envy brews. It may have been a pluck, at strings too frayed to play well. Your musings twinge in harmony, but who holds the baton in that arrangement? I pressed. Then I saw it. Her gaze swiveled sharply across the room, an expression like someone struck by a cold gust. Oh, it seems I must confess another truth. The man has eyes everywhere. You'll find the wrong kind of attention haunting those tunes too far off the stage. Ah, so our little ballet takes a turn already, I muttered, a smile creeping upon my lips. I'd wager Hargrove's envy leads him into the darkest parts of his soul. Yes, and your presence might compel him, but not without consequence. Her voice flickered as shadows danced around us. You cannot make an encore at gunpoint. Air became charged, her warning ringing with an echo of threat. But before I could respond, Hargrove's familiar figure emerged from the depths of the club, fresh with malevolence, moving through the crowd like a predatory shark. "Ah, just in time for the show," I remarked, mixing irony and tension. "Guess the house is full indeed," Tamsin whispered, pulling back as if words could shield her from the world's impending danger. "Be careful, Archie." As Hargrove's gaze rested on me, poised like a hunter, I turned, leaving the foam of deception behind. The stage reshaped, while a world filled with whispers enveloped me, striding into the underbelly of this game. Underestimating foes, even for the finest of players, often led to discord. If Hargrove thought to unearth secrets, he'd find himself conducting the melody of his own demise. And as the night deepened, I became determined to navigate the webs until I exposed the truth lurking beneath the harmonized. Chapter 11. A Night of Reckoning. The air was thick with the aroma of roast lamb when I stepped into the brownstone, with the promise of an evening's drama yet to unfold. The soft clicks of my shoes echoed off the polished wood floors, a testament to the meticulously planned aesthetics that Wolfe insisted upon. He lounged, as was his idiosyncratic style, in his favourite chair, a silk napkin strategically draped across his lap, his dark eyes glinting above his plate with an expression of feigned indifference. "Ah, Archie," he said, the words dripping from his mouth like honey, "what brings you here? You appear to have tangled with a storm, and I hope not one that's wreaked havoc upon my pantry." I grinned despite myself. "Hardly, Nero, though a tempest indeed brews, both in my mind and the streets of New York. Your culinary masterpiece seems safe for another evening." He offered a brief nod, returning to the last morsel of lamb with exquisite care. "Then share your delightful troubles, but be quick about it. A sauce must not simmer too long to remain savoury, nor must a narrative be drawn out to weariness." I perched on the edge of my seat, certain that the night had been anything but uneventful. You recall our charming friend, Domingo Hargrove, the merry maestro who threads his spell through the lives of musicians? Yes, Doom's orchestra, complete with shadows and daggers. Proceed. Tonight at Fagan's, Hargrove had the audacity to hold court amongst the husks of his former favourites. It was a scene as exotic and garish as a sideshow. Jazz, crawling through the room, mingled with desperate whispers and broken promises. Spare me the excess. Did you glean anything of substance? I raised an eyebrow, amused by his impatience. As a matter of fact, I did. Tamsin revealed that jealousy thrums beneath Hargrove's grand facade like discordant notes in a symphony gone awry. She suggested his hands are more than mere puppets. They're often stained by unseen blood. Wolfe placed his fork down, intrigued, the taste of lamb barely lingering in his satisfaction. "And you believe Hargrove is linked to the recent spate of, shall we say, unpleasantness?" "Yes, but it's more than idle gossip. There's treachery afoot. Artie's death was but the prologue, and Hargrove is the maestro at the helm of this decadence. Tamsin's warnings only heighten the danger. We must act before the night's final curtain falls." Wolfe's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, betraying a flicker of energy I seldom witnessed. "What do you propose? Visit Hargrove tonight? Make him play his hand, show us the strings he pulls, and perhaps expose his underlings' murky motives?" Chiu Fu regarded me with a mixture of scepticism and fascination. "Ah, how amiable! This must end in folly or revelation, and I confess, while I loathe direct engagement, the thought of a ripe controversy makes me curious. And yet, if anything goes awry, I shall be the one dancing to a dirge," I remarked, standing up and tugging at my coat. "Apprehension through artful inquiry, my friend." Wolfe grimaced. "You would be well advised to keep a safe distance from the vagaries of fate." "Safe distance won't unearth truths, Nero. A step toward danger invites clarity." He leaned back in his chair, allowing a silent sigh of resignation to lag in the space between us. "Very well, but let me impress upon you the cardinal rule. Always keep your wits about you. I suspect Hargrove is not unaware of your presence." "Already ahead of you," I assured him, the thrill of the hunt buzzing beneath my skin. "I'll be leaving in a moment." As I prepared to exit, Wolfe called out, "Archie, if you meet the man directly, do extend my deepest culinary apologies for not joining you for supper. The roast is exceedingly good tonight." Chuckling, I slipped out into the murky night, a chill creeping up my spine. Each step toward Fagin's reinvigorated the pulse of excitement coursing through me. The lithe forms of street lamps cast eerie shadows, elongating my silhouette, as if I were a character stepping from one of Hargrove's obscure ballads. Upon arrival, I was greeted by the unrepentant warble of the saxophone and the vivid chatter of patrons caught in the cobweb of intoxicating notes. Moving through the throng, I scanned the faces for the familiar spectre of Hargrove. But before I could indulge in any theatrical musings, my gaze fell upon a table in the corner of the club. Tamsin sat there, reclined yet poised, her crimson hair dancing beneath the dim lights. I approached her, and the electric tension of our previous conversation hung palpably in the air. "Back again, detective," she greeted, a smirk playing on her lips. "I trust you've come to offer me a front-row seat to the unfolding chaos?" "With popcorn, if only my constitution allowed. The maestro is here, lurking amongst the shadows. Saw him just a moment ago as I came in." Her smile faltered, a hint of concern flashing in her eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game. You ought not to indulge Hargrove's ego. He's not a man known for mercy." "Mercy is hardly the currency of our current dealings. In truth, I'd say he's conducting a haunting melody of deceit." Just then, a man I hadn't noticed before slipped into view. He was tall, his slicked-back hair glinting under the club's opalescent hues. Hargrove sauntered towards us, a sardonic grin stretched across his face. "Archibald, fancy seeing you here courting danger. Have you come to plead for mercy for your late friend?" he sneered, eyes devoid of warmth. "Only the living are deserving of such luxuries, Hargrove. Artie was but a note in your elaborate sonata, underplayed and easily forgotten," I replied, my heart racing. "But I've come to discover what other tragic figures you've orchestrated in your rise." A quick shift flashed across his face, icy and calculated. "You enjoy your dance of inquiry, don't you? Tell me, how long before those steps become a misstep?" I leaned forward, matching his intensity. "Perhaps I'm waiting for the right moment to find your feet tangled in your own web. Tamsin here says you've been conducting a symphony of jealousy and betrayal. Care to give me tickets to your show?" His laughter was a chilling echo. "You amuse me, detective. But believe me when I say, the last act often doesn't end well for those who cannot play the notes demanded of them. I won't hesitate to sing if they're the wrong notes, Hargrove. I'll be in the front row to witness if the curtain falls prematurely." At that, he spun on his heel, stalked back into the crowd, purposely ignoring the ripples of tension he left in his wake. Tamsin's expression shifted from intrigued to alarmed. "You provoked him," she warned softly. "That's not wise, Archie. Wisdom is relative. And if I read this evening's refrain correctly, it was a necessary note to strike. There's more to discover, and Hargrove won't hold the stage alone much longer. Dance with shadows enough, and the light must eventually spill through amid the clamour." I locked eyes with Tamsin, holding the thin thread of resolve between us. I needed one more step toward clarity before the night closed. "Tell me," I said quietly, "do you believe he's capable of murder?" Her gaze wavered momentarily before she took a breath, a shadow of truth flitting across her face. "That depends. How much do you value your life when the music draws to a close?" Hargrove is dangerous, and he's surrounded by those who'd play the final note. A sudden commotion drew our attention as Hargrove reappeared, shouting something in angry retort just outside the club. My instincts sparked, with a jolt of revelation igniting my veins. The night was dark, but it could still give way to illuminating truths. A figure rushed past us, another musician perhaps, claiming to flee from the chaos, their fear evident. I turned to Tamsin. It seems the show is about to get interesting. Care to join me in the audience? She nodded reluctantly, and as we navigated through the fog of jazz and foreboding notes, the anticipation of the unknown danced around us like an unseen spectre, promising ruin or redemption. And just as I caught a glimpse of Hargrove, the unsettling notion bloomed in my mind. Every crescendo was a prelude to the symphony of revelation waiting just beyond the darkness. And before long, even the most carefully orchestrated melodies could unravel into discord. In a city where shadows might conspire, the truth wasn't merely a whisper. It was the final engagement, ripe for the harvest. Chapter 12. The final curtain falls. The din of Fagans was a squall of vibrant voices and sharp saxophone, a soundscape I could barely navigate without a guide. I had only just slipped past the crowded bar when I was unexpectedly intercepted by a familiar figure, her red hair shining like a beacon amid shadows. Tamsin's expression was a mix of excitement and alarm, compelling me to pause. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice barely rising above a trumpet's wail. "I thought you were just another fool succumbing to Hargrove's charms." "The charm of the beast is in uncovering his fangs," I countered, casting an eye toward the corner where Hargrove had disappeared. "If you're going to sit by the stage, you should at least know what song is currently playing, filet or detective," Tamsin said dryly. But she indicated with a nod to follow her as we slipped between the crowded tables. "He's not one to toy with, Archie. I don't fancy being part of your last act." "Then consider it a duet. We're in this together, whether you acknowledge it or not." I caught the glimmer of nerves in her gaze as we approached a small table just 2 rows from the stage. Hargrove was seated there, ludicrously grand, sipping a drink between bemused conversations with fellow musicians, all of whom were thrilling in obscured secrets. As we settled in, I leaned closer to Tamsin. If Hargrove's performing tonight, he will play his hand in ways he least expects. All I have to do is bait him. "You're not a fisherman, Archie," she replied, stealing a quick look at Hargrove. "You're a man well aware of the currents that can drag you under." That remark hung in the air as I trained my eyes slowly on Hargrove, all flamboyance and lurking intentions. Just then, he turned his head toward us, and our eyes met. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, quickly replaced by the mask of contempt that seemed forever his default expression. "Archibald, Tamsin, come to enjoy my efforts at deception?" he called out with ostentatious flair, his voice rising above the jazz that swirled around us. "We're here for the cozy atmosphere," I replied, sliding into a role I loathed but recognized was necessary. "You know, the intimate buzz of impending chaos." Tamsin shot me a look, half worried, half impressed. His lips curled into a smile as he waved a hand dismissively. "Chaos is an illusion, like your theories, my friend. Please, stick close. Enough so you don't miss the act, as I peel the layers of your anxieties away. I'm quite good at this part of the performance. Such flattery, Domingo, I said, a sigh seeping through my voice. I'm hardly one to applaud an empty stage. The rhythm in the room shifted slightly as the jazz band pulled back, leaving a spotlight on Hargrove, who basked in the attention. He bore the mantle of the maestro well, but attention seemed woven into the fabric of his words, a pulsing undercurrent threading suspicion into the gathering. Tamsin was focused, her eyes narrowing as Hargrove gesticulated grandly. And now, dear patrons, brace yourselves. I shall unveil the alluring tale of a brother lost to the clangour of jealousy. A scene worthy of your baked suppers and delicate ears. The moment he said it, I felt Tamsin quiver beside me. What's he playing at? I murmured, my instincts firing. A charade, she replied tersely. He wouldn't dare explain all of that without expecting trouble. Indeed, amid the applause, I couldn't help but find the steps of his performance unrecognizable as they spiraled into a crescendo. He poured more of his drink, one eye constantly scanning the crowd, and I had a hunch he wasn't merely searching for appreciation. As the act carried on, the figures around the stage began to edge closer. I recognized one musician, a dishevelled man with a weathered face, Artie's former partner, Carl. He wore an expression tight with grief, puzzlingly plaintive beneath the brisk atmosphere. I felt Tamsin draw in her breath sharply. "Watch him," Tamsin whispered. "He could unravel everything. However he chooses to unwind, I suspect he might hold more threads than Hargrove anticipates." But just as I began to navigate through the crowd in Carl's direction, an outburst from Hargrove froze me in my steps. His laughter boomed as he leapt from his seat. "Oh, fear not, friends. Jealousy serves as a fine seasoning. It only cooks those unwilling to dance." Then there was a sudden crack. A glass shattered against the floor, and heads whipped towards the source. Carl stood with a hand shaking near the edge of his table, eyes wide with fury, face flushed. "I know what you did," he yelled over the din, his voice cracking as the band ceased once more. "Did you murder him for your own gain? Was Artie just another pawn in your puppet show?" Tamsin nearly jumped from her seat, grabbing my arm firmly. "You've got to stop this," she hissed, but the words fell unheeded like falling debris onto a furious stage. "Hush, artful musician," Hargrove returned easily, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. "Your drama is tiresome, and your grief is misplaced. Artie was never a friend, mainly an inconsiderate chord in my symphony." The audience began to murmur, their eyes darting between the two men locked in a disquieting confrontation. I sensed the tides turning dangerously, perilously, and the chaos was threatening to swallow everyone whole. "Hold your tongue," Carl demanded, his fists clenching. "You and your damned jealousy. He deserved better." "Is that so?" Hargrove's voice had dropped to a silk-threaded menace, dangerously baleful. "What gives you the right to judge? You were a mere note in this composition, and I have always conducted from above the orchestra. That was my moment." I surged forward, stilling the scene before it unravelled beneath a cacophony of blows. "That's enough," I declared, stepping between them like an unyielding wall. "There's a stage, a floor, and a resolution yet to discover. let's bring clarity where there's now only noise. And just as I aimed to separate Carl from Hargrove's contemptuous glare, a figure from the crowd alighted like a silky ghost. Tamsin placed her hand on my shoulder, speaking in a voice both serious and determined. "Archie, let's not forget that truth dwells in ambiguity, dancing tantalizingly close to disaster. Indeed, if only I were hunting a choir of angels," I said, my gaze locked on Hargrove. "But as it stands, Hargrove doesn't conduct without intention." "Then what's the good of this mundane choice?" Hargrove scoffed, his bravado wavering ever so slightly. "What could a broken musician know of melody?" "Perhaps," I offered, leaning forward slightly, "that you're the one currently holding the final notes of a disarranged symphony, orchestrating chaos behind the facade of lofty mastery?" A ripple of murmurs swept across the club. Even Hargrove failed to hide the twinkle of misstep starkly painted on his face. "Enough of this charade," I continued, recognizing the spotlight was not just on him, but on the truth I desperately needed to unearth. "Your secrets will not hold forever, and like an audience, the world is awaiting its final curtain. Someone else took the stage, and your symphony falters when the audience calls for clarity." The room fell silent as Hargrove's gaze faltered against the growing swell of realization. "Artie did not die from fate, my friend," Carl interjected, trembling fingers clawing at the table for support. "You held the knife behind closed curtains, and your greed was as ruthless as your talent." The audience gripped tightly onto those words, as though they would secure their own safety from the unravelling drama. In the crushing silence, I sensed something shift within Hargrove, an adjustment to the weight of truth pressing down on him. His confidence, once resounding, now seemed like a fragile veneer, crumbling before the glare of unwelcome scrutiny. "And so, we find ourselves at the intersection of fate and consequence," I said softly, allowing the moment to linger with grace and resolve. "The music of lies falters beneath the weight of integrity, just awaiting its final bow. I suggest you prepare for a rather abrupt curtain fall." Hargrove's eyes blazed with a hidden fury, a fierce acknowledgement that the melody was shifting from his grasp. Carl remained standing tall, his voice steady. "No more games, maestro. Now we'll play by my rules." The ambience of Fagans, the underlying hum of jazz and uncertainty, was entwined as we awaited the next act, fully aware that the climax was nigh upon us. And as the tension rose, intertwined with the echo of our determined resolve, the curtain would inevitably rise on the unravelling symphony of truth.